Welcome to another episode of Lighting Bot and an interview with Sourabh from Turn Studio, who has worked on different titles and is currently working on games such as Forza Motorsport, for all I know. But we'll find out together, I guess. We almost forgot to click live because we were already talking in the back here. So luckily I looked at the clock and we're on time. So we'll start by adding him into the conversation and he can present himself. Welcome, Sourabh.
Hey, thanks, Amit. Hi, guys. My name is Sourabh Hamigi. I'm currently a technical lighting artist working at Turn Studios on Forza Motorsport series. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, it's nice to have you. It's definitely exciting to have an opportunity to talk to you. Saurabh is pretty good at what he does, so I'm definitely happy to pick his brain. So I think we can probably start a little bit. If there's anything you want to introduce yourself about, a little bit about your background, maybe your studies and stuff like that.
Sure, yeah. So I started in the game dev about 6 years ago. I was actually back home in India. I'm originally from India. So my first game dev experience was basically when I had an internship with a small indie studio called Holy Cow, where we were building an Android-based VR application, and this was at a time when Google Cardboard was just a thing. That's when I sort of like kicked off into game dev. And in terms of my background, I have a computer science bachelor's degree, so that's where my sort of technical background comes from when it comes to programming and or scripting, anything like that. And then from then on, I sort of like moved into another studio called Byju's, which is again based in India. It was an educational game based studio, and I was working as a game designer. So I did start off as a different role in both the first internship and the second job. And at the same time, I sort of had like my footing in semi-professional freelance photography, where I would be I did a lot of freelance photography and also video production at the time for a year, or more than a year. Before which I decided I wanted to be in game dev completely, and I wanted to get into AAA. So I figured like maybe having a education in our master's program in the game dev would be something that would like give me an edge, and also like doorway to bigger AAA companies. That's when I moved to the US, and I did a master's in game dev in the University of Utah. From there, I worked on another multiple indie games, and then I went into WB Games or Avalanche, where I worked as a technical lighting artist. So that was my first AAA lighting position, where I worked as a technical lighting artist on Hogwarts Legacy for a year. After which I moved to Seattle to work on Forza Motorsport.
Cool. So quite a journey so far, basically. So you've have an opportunity, and you've had an opportunity to learn a little bit and try different things. So I noticed it makes a bit more sense now, since now you just told me that you have a bachelor in science. Now it kind of makes me understand why you're so good on the technical side as well. You had a good starting front when it comes to that area. So that's pretty cool. So let's talk a little bit about what you can and cannot share, I guess. So you did a little bit of something on, I guess, Hogwarts Legacy. So what happened there? What did you do for the 10, 11 months you were there?
Sure, yeah. So again, my position is like sort of a niche of a niche. Like lighting artist himself is like a AA to AAA sort of role. Like it's not something that's very common in all across the board in game dev. And I was more focused on the technical side, but also at the same time the art side too. But since I had a technical art background, I was sort of like in a technical art role there, but just for lighting. My day-to-day sort of like, to be obviously on the surface level, not to break my NDA, my day-to-day task involved working with like programmers, especially graphics programmers or CG programmers, and then environment artists. and the leads there to establish tech or come up with solutions we, for which we needed like a lighting benchmark, or like we had a target for how a game should look. And obviously there's a lot of hurdles and challenges and technical challenges especially. So my day-to-day work involved a lot of like prototyping, figuring out different ways, and like trying to come up with like solutions, to get to the end result. um, yeah, that was mainly what I did there, and also was sort of like working on creating a better pipeline for the entire lighting team. There was this pretty small team. There was, I think, yeah, I don't even know if I'm allowed to say that. So there was a pretty small team. So
It's okay. Just break the NDA. No one will know. Just do it. No one know.
double low when I'm on live. So yeah, making sure, try working with the pipeline, making sure that the lighting artist's life is easier, the environment artist's life is easier, was my other primary task. So yeah, that's what I
Okay.
did at Avalanche.
So that's interesting. So let's make the assumption that I don't know what a lighting artist do, especially a technical lighting artist. So
Sure.
why don't you explain what does it mean to be a technical lighting artist? Like, what are their skill set, expertise, and typical day that the lighting artist that is technical that experience? So let's explain that to people who don't know what that is.
Um, well, I guess it would depend on studio to studio. Like I said, technical lighting artist is a very, it's not a very common position. So it's been similar, but also different from the two studios I've been in, AAA studios I've been in. But I guess the skill set would be knowing the fundamentals of how a frame is rendered in video games. Knowing the basic difference between what is a deferred lighting pass or what's a forward shading pass, or just understanding the fundamentals of PBR and why that's super important. In today's AAA game production, um, and basically knowing like everything there is to know to become a lighting artist, right? And that's one of the skills that you need to, right? Like what's specular lighting, what's diffuse lighting, why do what's the physics of light, in real world, and how it translates to games. How can we mimic it? How can we be hacky? How can we get global illumination? um, Different methods of doing it, and honestly, lot of reading, sitting and reading and evaluating papers that's out there. That's like half of my job, um, because like there's so many ways and so many tech out there already, and which a lot of games do, and a lot of SIGGRAPH and GDC presentations have a lot of resources that can help us, like be a collaborative problem solver in a way. Yeah, I would say like that, and having a CS degree definitely helps um, because of that I can like jump into blueprints or even Python and like C sharp, and like build something like really quickly, because it's not super programming heavy, but it's not like it's a tech art level. A level of programming that I'm used to, which I don't mind. So I guess it definitely helps to like just jump into a different engine just to build a proof of concept when you're trying to sell something. Um, yeah, that I guess like those three would encapsulate sort of like the day-to-day aspects that I do.
So basically, you make people like me having a life easier life. Basically, you
Pretty
don't do that.
much. Yeah, I try.
That's really cool. I mean, that's really handy for a studio, I guess, to have a technical lighting artist who's more like understanding of light, but also able to kind of solve the technical challenges that maybe I would say a stereotypical regular lighting artist might not be interested in or have the skills to do. Right.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. Just a reminder for everyone else, you can ask questions if you want to. You can leave it on wherever you are. It should pop up on my screen, and we'll highlight any questions you have in terms of lighting. It can hopefully be towards Sourabh, but if you have anything specifically for me, which can also include Unity and Keyshot and stuff, feel free to be comfortable and be part of the conversation. So don't worry about that. So obviously, technical lighting artist is beyond my understanding because normally I prefer having someone else do the technical part as much as possible. But so right now, if you were to break down your average day at work, how is that compared to when you were, for example, doing the the Hogwarts stuff? Is it the same or?
It's in a way it's similar, in a way it's a lot different, just because studios work differently. Working on different games is obviously a big difference. I mean, that's one of the most primary difference. Studio culture changes, and also the tools that we use, engines that we use change. So a lot of challenges and hurdles, or even like the way of flow of thinking will change based on all of these factors. I would say there's again, yeah, there's a lot of prototyping that I've done in the past that I still do. I think which is similar, and a lot of pipeline work which is also similar. But there's also a lot of difference that I can't really get into super detail with. But yeah.
So, is there anyone else in your team that does the lighting as well, or is it mostly you?
So I'm the only technical lighting artist, but we have a team of 4 people, including myself. And everyone else is basically a lighting artist there, an outside lighting artist purely. And I handle the technical aspect. Yeah.
So, are you okay with it? Like, you do more of the technical stuff, or would you, if you could, would you do more of the artistic lighting as well, or how does that work for you?
Personally, I always have a crave of 50-50 when it comes to the work I want to do, because I do want to work on artistic aspects too, because I just lighting scenes, and I mean, like creating pretty images. But I also like the technical challenges. My day-to-day work is definitely way more technical, but it's really enjoyable, just because it's challenging. I have to be constantly open to ideas, trying to figure out stuff, and just, yeah, be like innovative. um but yeah, eventually I will hopefully get into the artistic side too, when things start like riling up and we're in production mode, how that goes.
So, if you don't have a lot of artistic stuff at work, say you're spending a month or 2 months doing mostly technical related work, tools development, bug fixing, I would imagine also sometimes you have to do a lot more of. Uh, do you normally do something at home, like for your personal portfolio, or do you don't feel like it when you come home?
I do a lot of personal projects, actually, just for the very reason that I want to keep up to date with the current third party engines, current tools, current technology, and just to it's like any skill set is like a muscle, that if you don't keep using it, you're gonna get rusty, and you're not gonna keep up. So I make sure that I engage in a lot of side projects whenever I get time, and especially with the pandemic, it helps to stay at home all the time and be working on something other than work. Yeah.
It's definitely it is definitely tiresome to a certain degree to keep up with everything. That's for sure.
Yeah.
It's competitive without being competitive in the sense that like Unreal Engine 4 is coming probably around summer next year. A lot of people are trying to stay ahead of that, learning it and kind of figure it out. Have you tried doing it already, or are you sticking to Unreal Engine for 26?
You mean Unreal Engine 4, 5?
Yeah. Which one
I'm
are you
I
using mostly?
I'm still using 4. I did try 5, just to play with Lumen and like try Nanite. There's been a side project or a game I've been working for almost 7-8 months now. So I was planning to move that over to 5, and I tried doing it, but there was obviously still some issues and like compatibility problems that I wasn't ready for. So generally I'm still on 4, but every now and then, like, I just play with 5, uh, just to experience what new stuff Epic's making out there.
So, do you have any opinion on it? Have you figured out anything like pros, cons, or as a technical artist, have you measured the frame rate cost compared to Unreal Engine 4? Do you have any, you know, current opinion on it?
I can't say I've done that yet. just because I haven't gotten around to doing that. But yeah, I am pretty impressed with Lumen and Nanite so far. Um, just like being able to out of the box just like put in a direction light or any local light and just expecting GI to work. Um, yeah, I haven't done like a deeper dive into like how they're doing it, or like what are the different steps they're doing like to basically make that possible, or even see how the performance pans out, etc. But just like on the surface level, whatever I've tried, it was pretty impressive. And I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, I just downloaded it today, actually, first time. So I'll try and open it up as well and see what happens. Thanks for the comment, Tula. Uh, Again, feel free to ask questions if you have any. So I have just opened Unreal Engine 4. I haven't tried it yet, but I'm trying to upgrade some projects myself to see what happens or not. So we'll see how that goes. So one thing I noticed from your history of roles is that you did a couple of other things before becoming a technical lighting artist. For instance, this as a game developer, freelancer, a game designer. You briefly mentioned it earlier. Was that more like coding related, or was that actually design related? What happened during all this process that led you to become a technical lighting artist?
Yeah, so the game design specifically, I think you're talking about Byju's, and this was back in home in India. It was Byju's was educational company. They make like apps, especially mobile apps for kids from K3 to K12 to I think even like middle school, if I'm not wrong. So I did work as a game designer there, which involved a lot of prototyping, and that again that came from my background of having computer science, where I could just jump into Unity or Unreal and create a specific idea that I had. So, but I'm like, hey, this is like a vertical slice of whatever I wanted to like convey, or this is like a prototype of the design that I think will be pretty cool. um, so yeah, that was basically the general process. It was design philosophy through a lot of prototyping, which is pretty common in all studios. Trying something out, executing it, seeing if it works, and if it doesn't, scrub it, go back to the next idea, trying it out, play testing that, and seeing if that works.
Okay. So, what made you figure out that lighting was your thing, though?
So when I came here, before coming here, like I said, I was freelancing in photography for a while, and lighting is really important in photography or video production. And you start to understand that it's probably one of the most significant things that makes an image or any sort of digital frame look prettier. You can have like a bunch of gray cubes laid around, and if it's lit beautifully, it's gonna look amazing. So that's when I realized, and then coming into video games and making 3D games, I was like, oh wow, like lighting is definitely a big deal, especially in AAA. The more I got into it, the more I realized like whatever I'd learned from photography was sort of like overlapping with like what I was doing in lighting. I was also fortunate enough to come across a mentor. Her name's Nora. She she helped me a lot initially, and like without her, like I wouldn't have even known how big of a deal lighting is, and like I don't even know like how the skill set required are all different aspects, that I need to get to the place I am right now. So yeah, because of photography and having the CS background and just saw like things falling into place, i I just realized I had a knack for lighting, or I could like basically get into it, make an image look prettier, and realize why I did that. So I'm like, I want to do this, and I enjoy doing that.
Okay. So, would you say having a mentor was useful and helpful to get into this?
Definitely, especially for a role in an industry that's very niche or very uncommon. It's very easy to stumble upon misinformation on the field rather than the correct guidance and correct information. And having a mentor who can tell you, who can be really, what do you say? honest about the feedback, help you grow from like saying, hey, this is why your piece doesn't work, this is how it works, just a hard skill. And also just like understanding the realities of the industry, the journey other people take, and like how what you can expect from it. I think it's an invaluable
Okay.
experience.
So let's try and break up this interview a little bit in segments. Do you want to talk a little bit about one of your pieces and explain, like using share screen to kind of explain your thought process, why you chose whatever you choose, and kind of explain where you place the light and whatever you really think is useful for people who want a breakdown of one of your scenes? Would you like to do that?
Sure, yeah, I can do that. Let me share my screen.
Let's do it. I see you have a fan in the background still. I assume it's still 30 degrees.
Yeah, it's close to 100 degrees Fahrenheit here in Seattle. It's like the worst hot weekend we've seen in the summer apparently for a while, and it is not very fun right now. It is, yeah. I'm sweating right here.
Nice and
Um,
neutral here. So which piece do you want to break down a little bit for people?
I can talk about this one just because I made this from scratch to finish. And I can actually show you the revisited lighting of the same piece with Unreal Engine 5 later, because I had control over literally every aspect of this piece. I can explain why I did that and why I basically went from that place. So the this basically spawned from a concept and actually a class that I had taken in my masters. So this was the original concept. It's obviously not a one-to-one, and I had a lot of inspiration come from this, especially the environment, the general like mood of lighting and the framing, especially. So this was one of those projects where I wanted to introduce myself to environment pipeline, modeling, texturing, procedural texture creation or material creation and whatnot. So this all obviously started with the block out, and then you can see the progress as I built the assets, textured them, and so on. For me, the one of the biggest aspects I had in my mind while doing this project was photorealism and trying to be subtle with lighting, um, and at the same time, make it look like a scene that can actually exist, and it could be a picture of an actual abandoned place. See, one of the key concepts is also obviously being strictly close to what PBR is, and like like sticking to the values. As you can see, I break down the base colors, and how like every subtle difference in the color value and the value shift of base color can have like a significant difference in lighting. And obviously just looking at what are metals, what are not metals, and how would you light a metal when it's in a space which is not lit by direct light or any real-time light, and etc., stuff like that. So going back to the piece itself, again, like my primary atmosphere that I wanted to deliver was basically it's a scene lit by sunlight. So I start with, first of all, I don't even start with the sunlight. I start with just the sky outside. Even though you can't really see it, it's really crucial for indoor scenes, because if you have an opening like a door, a couple of windows, a lot of light is indirect light is like leaking through or bleeding through these openings and lighting up the room. So I generally always start with the sky and fix on like the kind of sky I want, like midnight or daytime, sunset. What's the amount of clouds, because that determine how much of light is coming in. So and then I add the sunlight, and add a prominent directionality. And in my scene specifically, I wanted to break it down to foreground, midground, and background, and basically have the viewers look at these props as they move across the scene from front to back. So like here, my intention was like the brightest aspect or the focal point is like the chair here. So looking at this portion of the screen, and then moving towards the midground, which is obviously the broken down table right here, and then going back and sort of exploring what's there. So I wanted my beats of like light, dark, light, and just like the atmosphere, just like reacting to that. So I placed directional light and a couple of local lights to basically mimic those effects. And then in the end, it's a lot about like painting your scene with like subtle lights, so you can just like make your assets stand out. You have better silhouettes of like the assets you have. For example, like the door which is like leaning against the wall here, there's a really subtle light that hitting the side of it just to shape it a little bit better. The same thing with the lantern here, you can see a small specular hit, which is again coming from a small.
I was gonna ask that next. Like, if was that just happened to be a good placement with some other light, or if you specifically placed that so you could get that little speck?
Yeah, those are intentional. Like I call it light painting. That's the term I like to use, where basically um like just like this moments of like rim lighting, or just like spec hits, or just like highlighting a surface of an asset just with a specific color or value. I generally tend to do that. So this one, and you can see the same with the chair here, getting a nice rim lighting, which is coming from a bunch of place local lights. Um, it's pretty much the same scenario wherever you look in the scene. The more you observe, the more you realize it's like handcrafted and visually hand placed to do that.
So, for example, for the lantern with the speck light, did you use it to light anything else, or did you just place it in the air to get the speck light using a real time light?
I believe this one was just for the lantern, and this was lit on Unreal Engine, and Unreal has something called lighting channels, where you can specify if a specific asset is in a specific channel, only lights in that channel will affect that asset. So I can
Does,
have.
does that cost any more in terms of resources? Is it the same as not using lighting channel, or is it cheaper? Do you have any experience with that?
I do believe it's a little bit more expensive, but
Yeah.
since most of my lights here, where I paint something, are really small in radius, they don't cast shadows, and they're, well, yeah, they're generally like very cheap, or they're affordable, because they usually, even if they're casting shadow, they have like a spotlight which is like has a small frustum, or they have a small attenuation radius that they only have to like cover a small portion of the assets, and smaller it's a smaller cost. Is something that you can afford to do.
So, just to interrupt, Tola ask a question. What software did you use for the creation of the scene and also for rendering it?
So the renders themselves, this is straight out of Unreal Engine. There's also a couple of GIFs, basically, and I model everything in Maya, and texturing was done mostly in Substance Painter, and some of the procedural materials like the wood plank, the plaster, or this peeled out paint, they were done on Substance Designer. You can see the assets from Maya.
That's cool. So, would you say, as a lighting artist, do you need to know all of this, or could you possibly just focus on lighting?
I would say some aspects would be crucial to, be more effective at what you do. For example, understanding PBR is a really important thing, and even though most of authoring the materials and textures will be on the environment team or the look dev team, in the end, it sort of affects how the scene is lit and how light or shading is done on the surfaces. So definitely understanding what PBR is and why it's so important in today's AAA world is like, I think it's crucial too. It definitely helped me to basically just go through the environment pipeline, and just to understand the challenges, the workarounds, what are the hacks, and what are the things I had to employ to get the look I wanted. Not completely necessary, but definitely helps if you have the knowledge of it.
So let's say someone wants to become a lighting artist. They are pretty sure that's what they want to do. What's the most recommended, quickest, focused way to become a lighting artist according to you?
I think I think the first step for me, personally, I would say get a mentor or at least a good source of information or resources, because again, like I said, lighting is another field that's widely known in game dev itself, and it's often misunderstood and misinformed online. If you're looking at some resources, it can be really easy to get into a web of YouTube videos where you're doing something and it's not necessarily a fundamentally right thing. So getting a mentor or trying to find someone who can guide you through the process, I think is like really important.
All right, that's good. Let's see. Should we talk? Did you have any consideration or thoughts on the fact that you are originally from India, man of color? Has that been any challenges for you in terms of getting into industry or getting paid well or working normal hours? Because I know a lot of people from India, especially in India, have a lot of issues or challenges when it comes to working hours, working condition, getting an entrance. Because a lot of people, for some reason, which I'm not going to go into detail in this interview, do not want to work with a certain type of Indians, especially when it's a freelancer. Have you experienced anything, or has it been more or less normal for you?
Um, I can't say I've experienced any of those myself, but yeah, definitely. I think the whole concept of the game dev industry, especially in India, it's still a growing industry, and often it's not considered as uh, a potential career path by a lot of people and a lot of family. Fortunately, I had a family who was supportive enough to let me do what I want and even try it out. So in that sense, I would say it's still growing, and it has changed a lot in the last couple of years, as I've seen. Um, but it's definitely way different from what I've seen in the Western culture.
So you have a question from Nonne. How to do depth lighting? I mean the lighting with depth and does not look flat. Do we need to go for references or any suggestion? So I guess he's asking or she's asking, how do you not get flat lighting? Now this is a very common topic. It's also why we recommend having mentors to really understand the complexity of avoiding flat lighting. But I
Mhm.
leave it to you to try and explain how do you avoid uh, image looking flat with lighting. What does it mean
Sure.
according to you?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. This is a very common issue with like lighting and why something looking good and something looking bad differentiates that. Flat lighting usually comes with, like, if I'm gonna like move a little bit towards the concepts of photography, we have something called the contrast ratios. So if you're looking at, let's say, an image of a portrait image of a person, and you can and it maybe has something like a dramatic lighting going on, so you'll have one side of the face lit by a key light or a prominent light that's obviously hitting them from one side, and the other side is in semi shadow. It's way darker. It's way contrasty, and you can see the difference between the shading on one side and on the other side. So that is something that's called the contrast ratio, is basically saying how bright a one side to the other side is. So if the brighter side is two times brighter and than the other side, the contrast ratio is 2:1, and so on. So flat lighting usually happens when you have assets or a scene where a lot of values distributed on the surfaces are the same. So the contrast, there isn't a lot of ratio and contrast when you look at a scene. So for example, if you look at is my screen just still sharing?
Yeah, you can look up stuff. You can do whatever you want.
So let's look at, let me zoom this a little bit.
This is
Let's
all
look at
about you sharing stuff. So just do whatever you need to.
Let's look at this thing. For example, this is like a metallic grid box, or a power box that's there. So there's an obvious difference in the value of how bright or how dark it is from this plane of surface to this plane of surface. You can see approximately this surface is twice as bright as this, so the contrast ratio is 2 times or 1:2.
Remember,
So,
remember to have your mouse over the areas you talk about.
oh, really? Can you not see my mouse?
No, your image is zoomed in, so we only see the left side of the image.
I see. Okay. How do I share my mouse?
So we can see the door. We can see the thing on the left side. I don't know what it is. What is it?
I see. Yeah, I realize what you mean. So I am. It looks like the mouse isn't showing up on the stream. So I'm basically talking about the black power box in the middle here next to the door. If that
Right.
helps visualize it a little bit better, the one with the grid of white boxes within with a switch.
Because I see your mouse a little bit when you move it around.
Oh, really? Okay, that's interesting. That's weird.
All right. So you're talking about a grid box, okay? So
So basically, how the one side of the object is lit in shadows, or it's in shadows, the other side of the object is obviously a little bit brighter. So a flat lighting happens when, like, the values across different surfaces and across the scene is like, it's the same. There's no contrast. There's no strong directionality, etc. This happens for a multiple of reasons. One of them could be maybe it's an exterior scene and the sun is overhead and the shadows are all being cast beneath the subject and just blows out everything else, or maybe there's no proper occlusion coming from the sky, so the ambient light that's in a scene is just blowing it up and all the darks or all the blacks in the scene just become way brighter than it should look, and it just makes the scene way more flat.
hmm. Hopefully that answers your question. If not, you can join the Discord channel afterwards, and we might hang out in the Discord chat and Discord voice afterwards, and you can get some more, I guess, answers later. Um, you have another question from Tula. When it comes to textures, normal maps are used in place of displacement or bump maps to obtain more realistic lighting. Do you have a preference in terms of which map to use? So I guess he's asking, what should you use and why you should use one over the other.
So I'm just gonna clarify the terminologies here because they're used interchangeably. I'm assuming when they say displacement map, they don't mean tessellation maps, or height maps, and they're similar to bump maps. Bump maps are usually outdated right now, and they're not. I don't see them being used that often. Instead, with the normal maps, we do use AO maps, which basically um, AO maps are used to occlude ambient lighting. So I don't personally use bump maps anymore. If I want tessellation, I use height map or tessellation maps, and then obviously AO maps baked into the material, and then the normal maps. Bent normals are definitely a thing that's being used more and more. Um, that's an alternate solution to normal maps too.
Cool. Hopefully that answers your questions. If not, you can join Discord later. Rodrigo has a question. Is there some good documents where I can find the different type of lighting, like the rim light and other types of fill light? And also, basically, is there some basic resources you would recommend someone could go and look up to learn a bit of this basic 3-point lighting and stuff like that?
So I think the best resources for me, I would say, is anything related to photography or film, because film has been around way longer than game dev has, and they've already mastered the art of lighting, and a lot of concepts we use in games, basically we derive from film. In terms of personal preference to a book, there's a book called Framed Ink. I forget the author's name. It's a book where the author has a black and white sketches of a lot of instances of different lighting, composition, and I think it's a really great book if you want to understand the implications of lighting.
Cool. Hopefully that helps you as well. Um, we'll try and link this in our Discord channel later once we look it up for you guys to get it afterwards. Um, so we have a common question that people like to know is what is your favorite part of your role right now? Like, what's the best thing you can think of that you enjoy with your role at the moment?
I would say it's probably the challenges. Um, I know that's very generic, but just like looking at it's usually like looking at the final visual frame and basically like, hey, we want to get to this visual target but we can't right now. Is it a restriction in the pipeline, the tech? What's happening? Is it unhuman restriction? Like what's like finding solutions, just like going through those technical hurdles. It can be very satisfying once you solve it.
Okay, we have another question. Is rim light overused?
I mean, in a specific context, are you talking about like just generally in games?
Are
Is
you
that
are you referencing Horizon Dawn overuse of rim light or something? Uh, rim light. So I guess if you can clarify, that would be useful. But I guess the things like um, certain images have rim light, certain scenes have exaggerated rim light when they probably wouldn't have rim light, but someone puts rim light because it looks good. Would you say that's overused, or would you say it's a good reason to add rim light whenever you can?
I think it's a very generic question. I think part of it would just depend on your personal preference to the way. Oh, characters. Yeah, I see it. Um, well, I mean, if there was a specific example you had in your mind, maybe I could talk about that. But I don't think I've played any games recently feeling like, oh, that's an overuse of Rimlight specifically. So maybe there's something specifically that they have on their mind.
So basically, I guess they're saying, are people using room light too much on everything when it's not really needed? Like, would you say you always need rim light, or would you say there are situations where you don't actually need rim light, but someone, like, let's say if I'm mentoring someone and I might tell them to always use rim light just to get them started and get used to it, and then every time they do something, it's always rim light. Would you say you always should use rim light, or would you say there are cases where it's probably a good idea not to use a rim light?
I think the answer isn't as simple as a yes or no, because it depends on different kinds of lighting, right? So, for example, if you're lighting a character with a 3-point lighting, it's usually the key light, which is diagonally placed in front of the actor from either side, and then you have the fill light, which is lighting up the darker side of the actor, and then you have the rim light, which is usually placed behind. So but there are different kinds of lighting where you have like dramatic lighting where they use only one-sided lighting or two-sided lightings where they usually don't have rim lights. So it all depends on the mood and the kind of lighting you're going for. And I think just the general rule of thumb is like if you're lighting any scene or any character, and if you have a bunch of lights that don't seem motivated, for example, for rim lights, usually it's trying to mimic a light coming from the background that with a potential source there. So it's always about hiding a light in the scene, even though it's not there in the scene. So if you have a light, if I were to light someone and there's a light all the way in the back and you can actually see it in the corner of the frame, and you're trying to mimic the light coming from that through the rim lighting, then it's a motivated lighting. But if you have a lot of characters lit in such a way that there's no motivation of sources around, it can stand out very easily, and I think that can be a problem.
So I think Sourabh is pointing out some interesting points, because if you research about cinematographers, what you'll find out is people use for different reasons. There are some cinematographers. I'm really bad at names. I'm really sorry, but there are some cinematographers who will, as Sourabh and I probably are same that we try and use motivated lighting, but I know a lot of cinematographers in movies that don't have motivated light. There's no practical light on in the scene, and they will still use rim light and fill light because it just looks good. So I would say it depends on your style, but also I personally, and I think Sora is the same, would like to see the source of the light. Like there should be like yes, motivated lighting should be able to see where the light is coming from, preferably. So hopefully that helps you answer the question. But lighting is very artistic, so we try not to say yes, no, black and white, because there's always some scenarios where it might work. So we don't want to discourage you to do one or the other. But motivated lighting, I agree with Saurabh, is probably very useful to kind of focus on. So sort of you told us about your most favorite thing, which is challenges. What is your hardest part with your role? Would that also be challenges, or would it be keeping up, or what would be the hardest part with your role?
I would
Dealing with other lighting artists who don't know anything that you're doing.
no, my team is amazing, so I don't really have that problem. Um, I think for me it's picking in a reality of game dev production. There's only so much you can do, and there's a lot of things that's out of scope. And as a lighting artist, there's this huge checklist of things and features that I want because I'm like I want this game to look the best it can ever look, right? At the end of the day, I think there's gonna be, regardless of which studio you go to, there's gonna be a lot of features that you personally invested in, or a lot of ideas that you invested in that you have to let go, just because it's not in the context of scope or it's just not doable. I think that's really hard for me to do because like I have to do that a little often, um, more than I think other roles, just because I'm constantly coming up with like ideas and solutions that we need to solve, and then realize we can't get to it because we don't have enough time or enough resources to do it.
Cool. So, so one thing me and Saurabh are trying to do, no, we are going to do it. We're not going to try to do it. We are going to do it. We're going to be doing feedback sessions. So you can go to Discord and you can take part, or you can go to lightingbot.com and click the lighting feedback part of the website, and you can fill in a template, and you can then be part of our lighting feedback sessions in Discord, basically. And we will be trying to give you some very high level, in-depth feedback at least once a month, no more than two times a month. So if people are interested in that, they can go into lightingbot.com, click on the feedback button, or just jump into Discord and message me, and I'll tell you what to do. And then you will be able to share your work, and we will give you lighting feedback like no other. So that you can do. So to give you an example of that, normally it will be me and Sourabhs. We will give different point of views, different perspective. We might not agree, which is part of the fun here. But Sourabh will now have an opportunity to look at an old piece that I did a year or two, I think 2 years ago or something, maybe longer. And he will try and look at it, and he will try and critique it to the best of his ability. Hopefully he won't say it's totally shitty, but it's okay. It's an old piece. So it gives you an idea of the value of joining our feedback sessions, and it's completely free to do that. So hopefully you guys enjoy it. I leave it to Saurabh to tell me how shitty this piece is.
Wow, you're putting me in a spot now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was gonna talk about this one that Amit shared with me, just like my thoughts on it. So usually, whenever I'm setting up a scene or even like preparing to light something, um, the first most important things I think everyone would agree with is references.
I'm
And
taking notes. Let me take my notes here. Okay.
the references, and obviously I don't really have a reference of where you were trying to, or what mood or what composition you were trying to achieve, but I assume you had something on mind. But then I look at the composition itself, because I feel like lighting can take the frames only so far, and the composition is also really important when you're framing a shot. For example, like this, the 70 of at least 50% of the screen is built up of like uninteresting dark areas where there's like nothing here. And for me, maybe it was an intention to frame it a little bit better towards the shield here. But the other aspects is like I feel like this is subtle things. I see a lot of tangent lines. For example, the sheet. Um, Basically, like like creating a tangent line with like the pillar here, the same thing with the stone. And those are like really small tiny things that I've sort of learned from reading a lot of art books. Is basically these subtle tangent lines can um, sort of like destroy the guiding principles of the viewer's eye. Whereas if you just were to move the camera slightly towards the right, the shield would be a little bit more better positioned between the pillars, including the front and the back, and then it would create less, connecting tangents here and create a better silhouette of that. And then apart from that, I guess the composition of having a clear foreground, background, and a midground could help. For me right now, I see this as the only midground. Nothing to really frame that apart from the lighting itself in towards the focal point here. So maybe have a couple of like blurred out foreground assets, guiding the frame a little bit better towards this aspect of the scene. This is a good draw to the attention. You can see the guard rays or the light shafts basically guiding the viewer's eye towards this asset, but maybe it could be a little bit dimmer. I think the other aspects would just be making the scene a little bit more interesting with lighting. For example, like this entire portion of the scene, even though it's in sort of in the background and also like a little bit dimly lit, it can be a little bit interesting. Maybe a few torches or just motivated lighting or just to shape the background just a little bit better so you can make it a little bit more interesting. I think those are some of the things that I immediately see.
So I will send you another image, which is the same scene, but just different, just a little bit different. Let's see if you say they're same things, or if you would say that I fixed some of the things. This was updated like a month apart, I think, so it's a bit different. So it will be interesting to see what you say.
I definitely like the general composition on the left hand side a little bit more better. Um, you can see a little bit more of like specularity across the entire like scene a little bit better. These small rim hits, the specular heights, for me those definitely make the pillars and the assets stand out more and the silhouettes stand out more. um I wouldn't say it is completely different. I prefer this, probably a little bit more in the foreground. For me, I like this interesting portion of the frame that's happening.
Cool. So small improvements in the in a month's time, basically, between these two pieces. Um, I guess that's a good thing. So that's a quick sample of what type of feedback you might get. It will be a bit more different, of course, and there will be more stuff because I would also be doing it with some paint overs and stuff. So hopefully that was useful. That is some of the things we will do. So if you have any questions, I will put it up now. And there's one more question: is there any different lighters for lighting the 3D with live action to almost match the lighting in 3D and the rest of things done in compositing? That's a good question. Live action. Do you have experience with it? Nona, you should have been a last week, because last week we had someone who had experience in live action lighting. But let's see if we can still answer your question.
I'm assuming this is like 3D and like
It's it's
film.
like yeah, it's like what's it called? The Star Wars stuff, Mandalorian kind of stuff.
Virtual production.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I haven't had experience with it, but I feel like that's super fun, and I wanna just be in the set just to explore and experience that. Um, there's different lighters for lighting the 3D with live action to almost match the lighting in 3D.
To answer that a bit easier, while Surab thinks about his answer without actually having experience in it, because we can still give answer, is that I mean, as long as you know lighting, like lighting theory, color theory, compositing, and the engine, you should be able to do lighting in a live action as well. There are obviously some limitations and a different workflow, but as a lighting artist, if you understand lighting, you understand lighting, and it's more about learning the tools and how to use it and implement it. So I wouldn't say there's like you wouldn't normally see a job position, and they wouldn't normally say lighting artist specifically for live action. You can still get hired, you can still do the lighting even if you're from games. The main difference is, of course, we can do more in live action because we don't have that same limitation like optimization, playability, character visibility. It's not the same kind of mindset. So that's the key difference between game lighting, cinematic lighting, or even live action, is the mindset that goes into the things we have to keep in mind. So because Sourabh and I, we do a lot of game lighting. We have to pay attention to computer specs more. We have to pay attention to technical things, optimization, player path. Like, is it clear where the player is going? Now, it's a different thing when you do live action. It's a different thing when you do cinematic in terms of clarity and in terms of focal point, in terms of these kind of details when you do lighting, because we don't have the same limitations, but it's also different purpose. So hopefully that gives you an answer. But Saurabh, do you agree, disagree?
No, I do agree. I think like the biggest aspect of performance, we have to run a game or draw frames like 60 times in a second, or like 30 times. Obviously, that's the biggest difference between the limitations. And I think to answer the second portion of that question, which is to almost match the lighting in 3D and rest of the things done in compositing. Um, Regardless of which film or CG pipeline they have, and this is for me just like reading books and watching a lot of videos on this, there's always gonna be a lot of lighters in live action still use probes or chrome balls or lighting HDRI captures, which basically help light a scene in 3D to match the lighting in the that they've taken in in a camera. Um, I think that's really important because the advantage with something like Mandalorian, which is a virtual production, their motivation of lighting is motivated literally by a huge LED screen, which is lighting the actors. That's not the only thing that's lighting the actors, but it's like the reflection you see on the helmet of a Mandalorian is accurate because it's an actual reflection from the LED screen around with an actual environment. But if you were to do the same thing with a green screen, then you have to talk about, well, we have to map a reflection that doesn't exist in the 3D world from an actual capture, on the camera with the actual world. So there's obviously complications, pros and merits. Um, there's I actually follow this channel called Corridor Digital, which I watch regularly, and they're VFX artists, and they actually break down a lot of lighting stuff and just general VFX stuff in film and CG. I think that would be a good, fun information video to just go through.
Yeah. So, and also, if you are specifically asking traditional live action, meaning not a virtual production, yeah, of course, you would have new compositing, and a new compositing artist might do it, or a grader might do it. So, of course, then you might need to know that kind of grading and editing as well on top of everything. So that there are some differences in that, but there might be specific roles for that as well. Not necessarily a lighter would have to do it. It might be that the compositor does it using Nuke. But I do know a lot of people who do like animation, so they will do it in Maya, and they would also composite it in Nuke, for example, afterwards. So there are some extra tools that you might use to enhance. But I think I don't know if Sourabh does it, but sometimes we'll do it with our renders too. If we're just gonna do a render and put it on ArtStation, we might do like on DaVinci Resolve, and we might color grade it and do some tweaks as well. So I mean, there are other layers to being a lighting artist, at least on personal time. So that would be the last questions, and I would say if you guys want to hang out a bit, ask more questions, learn about stuff or whatever, you can come over to Discord community, and we'll hang out there probably at least 30 minutes or so. And you're free to join. Sourabh might be there or not. I haven't actually officially asked him yet, but he might be there if it's not too much of a time for him. But you can join the Discord. Go to lightingbot.com if you don't have access to Discord. And yeah, I would like to thank Sourabh. Thank you, Sourabh, for joining and for participating and sharing his experience. We're gonna go on hang out on Discord in probably a couple of minutes from now. We're just gonna take a quick break, and then we are on over to Discord. So pretty soon we'll be on Discord to hang out. So shouldn't be a problem. So thank you, Sourabh, for joining. Hopefully we see you again in the hangout in a few minutes. And yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Amit.
No problem. Any last words? Do you want to share your ArtStation link? Maybe I can share it for you as well.
Yeah, I think you have all the links. That would be great too. And otherwise, yeah, like Amit said, if there's I think it's a great initiative that Amit's taken to like try to make a common place for resources with terms of lighting, whether you're like a beginner, mid, or like experience, just finding that hub. I'm I was fortunate to find a mentor going through my journey, and I'm more than happy to help people on the server out well when we need to. So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And we will see you in Discord in about 5 minutes time or so. Just go in so we know people are interested. So we'll jump in earlier if we have to. So thanks for watching, and I'll end the broadcast. So see you guys around.